And welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor, whiskeypolitics.net. Welcome to America's Voice News. We are delighted to be here, 6 p.m. East Coast time nightly. And if you are not watching us on America's Voice News, you're watching this on YouTube or somewhere, get America's Voice News. All right, there's alternatives out there to the mainstream media, and we're having great discussions, great debates, a lot of live television, as well as wonderful shows like ours. If I could pat myself on the back, we work really hard here, folks. If you're not watching this on TV, you can find us on your favorite podcast application of choice, including iTunes. And if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating, as well as a comment. It helps others find us. And of course, you can always find us at the Ricochet Audio Network. So this week, we're going to be talking about the Kavanaugh hearing, how it's changed everything. And, you know, the Kavanaugh chapter, or maybe we should call it the Kavanaugh debacle, it was one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. Maybe, I can't think of another time, maybe Bush v. Gore, the election results that went on for a couple, 3 months. But no, this is, this was really, really ugly, folks. And the books are now coming out. You know, we just had on Megan Fox a couple of episodes ago. You certainly want to check that out. And she talks about how the Me Too aspect of this impacted the Kavanaugh hearings and how that's impacted our culture. But today we're going to be talking with Mollie Hemingway and Carrie Severino, who are the co-authors of the best-selling book. It just came out and it's already rocketed to the top of the charts, Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation, and the Future of the Supreme Court, published by our good friends over at Regnery Publishing. Carrie Severino is the Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network, and Mollie Hemingway is the Senior Editor at the Federalist. And between the two of them, they did over 100 interviews over 6 months, including senators, Supreme Court justices, and the President of the United States, where they went really deep behind the scenes of everything that we saw on our TV. We were screaming at the television, but what was going on behind the scenes? The anger that we felt, they were feeling as well. The senators were feeling it. It was really, really ugly. And so we're going to get really into all of this. We're going to talk about the players. We're going to talk about Dianne Feinstein, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham, and oh my goodness, you know, gangster life, Lindsey Graham. I mean, he was just incredible in that episode. Jeff Flake. What happened there? What happened with Susan Collins and Murkowski? And, you know, we go behind the scenes of how what was it? The gang rape allegations that Avenatti came up with. What was her name? Sweaty? Sweaty? I don't know. I remember that's an Alec Baldwin. That's an Alec Baldwin Saturday Night Live skit. Anyway, the fact of the matter is that we were all embroiled. We were disgusted, absolutely dismayed by not just how the Senate and, you know, Cory Booker and the Spartacus moment and how they basically raked this poor man over the coals and just completely ignored due process, right? It's hard to believe this was only 9 months ago. It feels like it could have been a few weeks ago. But again, we haven't been talking about it. The media, forget about further investigations. They wanted to do investigation after investigation after investigation, and they didn't want it to go to. They wanted to go to the election. They wanted the Senate Democrats to delay it past the election because they thought that they could turn the Senate, and then they could prevent him from taking his seat. Obviously, that didn't happen. He is now Justice Kavanaugh. We're going to get into all of this. So I think you're going to enjoy this. Stay tuned afterwards. I've got some parting thoughts after the interview. And we are very happy to welcome Carrie Severino and Mollie Hemingway here at Whiskey Politics. And welcome back to America's Voice News. Dave Sussman here, and delighted to have with us to talk about all of this Mollie Hemingway and Carrie Severino, who are the co-authors of Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation, and the Future of the Supreme Court by one of our favorite publishers, Regnery Publishing. Welcome, Carrie and Mollie. How are you?
Great to be here.
Great. Well, first of all, so much to discuss, and I just want to ask you both, how did you both come together to decide on how to do this book and work on this book together?
Well, we were friends before this book, but I think it's something we both covered in our jobs. Mollie, obviously, as a journalist, and me as leading the organization that was leading the charge to help get Justice Kavanaugh confirmed. But we felt like what happened last year was really one of the most important things that was going on in America. It was a huge battle. It was a trial not just for Justice Kavanaugh, but really justice itself was on trial, hence the title of our book, with these attacks on due process, on the rule of law, and on the presumption of innocence. So we knew it was really important for people to understand what really happened, because we felt like there were a lot of stories that had gone untold. And that was how we decided that it would be a good team with a journalist and a lawyer to be able to go back in, dig into the real facts. We talked to more than 100 people, the president, lots of people from the White House, the Supreme Court, senators, all over the place, to try to really get the true and full story of how Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed. And so we can learn from it, because we know there are going to be more confirmations coming down the line. And if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, and we were both interested in writing a book, and we needed to do it together to get it done as like in the time frame that we wanted to get it done by. And so we both wanted to do it. We thought we were good for helping out each other, and we are so glad that we worked together on this new project.
Yeah. Since the Clarence Thomas hearings, and I understand, Carrie, you clerked for Clarence Thomas. There was a process instituted, from what I understand, after that to prevent that from happening again. Most people believed Thomas, when he was accused by Anita Hill. What's changed in the past 30+ years?
That's exactly right. It was, in fact, 2-to-1 after he was confirmed. Americans thought he's the one that's telling the truth. But then there has been a steady drumbeat of misinformation, intentionally reimagining history, basically trying to discredit him, because they know he's one of the strongest conservatives on the court, the strongest voice for originalism. And we didn't want to see that happen again. And so we think the best way to fight that is to fight it with facts. So people really do know the true story. People are familiar with what really happened. I don't think we can just, brush off our hands and say, this is great, he's confirmed, we don't have to worry about what happened anymore, because it is really important that the things we uncover, and in particular the ways that the Democrats themselves were collaborating and helping with this rollout of a smear campaign. That's really disturbing.
Yeah. I would suggest that, obviously I want to get into this a lot more with you, but when we talk about the narrative today that's coming from the media and how people are actually learning today, we only had 3 television stations back in the day. How much of that do you think has changed because of our media and the narrative today?
We came across something very interesting that happened during the Kavanaugh confirmation. Was it Christopher Scalia, who's the son of Antonin Scalia, said, can you imagine what this would have been like to go through this without any, non-liberal media, without National Review, the Federalist, and other outlets? And Robert Bork Jr. responded, I can understand. I can't imagine what that was like.
Right.
Because that's what happened when his father was so horribly treated. It is very good that we have these other alternative ways of getting information out there, but it's still horrific how much there is this overwhelming media narrative. And this was a really particularly bad example where journalistic standards were just cast away with wild abandon. Stories were covered up. They knew information. We go through how NBC News actually knew that Michael Avenatti's supposed witness to corroborate the untrue allegations of his client, Julie Swetnick, NBC News knew she was saying, whatever he's saying I'm backing up is not true, and yet they hid that. They concealed it. They didn't release it until weeks after the confirmation battle was over, even though they knew it before. And there are so many examples of that type of willful misinformation, and that's also just why it's so important to get the facts out now. We know these same people, they didn't get fired, they didn't get punished, they're still in their jobs, and they're going to continue to spew this false narrative not based in facts. And we knew the best way to fight it, get the facts out actually doing research, reporting, interviewing these 100+ people who were seriously involved.
Yeah, and I understand you didn't just interview 100+ people. You interviewed senators and President Trump, right?
And Supreme Court justices, and
and friends of Kavanaugh, friends of Christine Blasey Ford, people who knew them back then. So we just tried to cover the whole field of the types of people who understood what had gone on here.
Let's talk a little bit about the process itself. Dianne Feinstein got a letter from Blasey Ford, and she sat on it. She should have known better. She's 84 years old. She's been in the Senate longer than all of us have been alive, I think, or at least in politics. And you talk about, how Avenatti ended up, and which is, I think, as karma can get right now. But whatever, this whole process, why didn't anybody question what was going on with Feinstein sitting on this? And I know we talked about it on the conservative right, but why didn't that become a huge thing?
Well, it certainly didn't become, we had a lot of examples of that rollout, which it really was a very nicely organized rollout of these accusations, not being called into question maybe by the media. But one really fascinating story that I loved learning about in the process was how that affected people like Susan Collins. So, maybe it wasn't getting the press we wanted, but it certainly made an impact on her. And one interesting thing is she said the moment that she saw that letter for the first time, the most salient thing about it to her was the date, because this is September and the date on that letter is in July. And it's like, wait a minute, how has this letter been in her possession for more than a month? And we're just seeing it now. And as you alluded to, there's a process for looking through allegations. We're not saying that people who have allegations against high profile figures or nominees shouldn't be heard. There's a process for doing it confidentially so that the Senate can make those assessments without bringing the accusers' lives into the public display, without the nominees being unfairly tainted by allegations that may turn out to not have any basis in them. And so that's something Feinstein, in all of her decades on the Judiciary Committee, she knew it well, and she did not follow that process. And there were other senators who, and key votes like Susan Collins, who said, this doesn't pass the smell test. That's a really bad red flag just from the get-go.
But this was also a case where the media were implicated in the story. They couldn't report accurately what Carrie just said, that there's a process for handling these things, because if they did, that would have made the whole operation look completely different than the way they were presenting it to people, as if this, there was nothing to be done and there were these mean bad guys who were trying to thwart this accusation from being taken seriously. If they'd reported the facts, that the Senate has a procedure, that it was willfully gone away from, and that procedure protects accusers and those they accuse, they would not have been able to write stories and have explosive bombshells, and so they chose not to cover the truth.
Are there ramifications for something like this in the Senate? Are there procedures when you have a ranking member, Dianne Feinstein, that basically blatantly sat on this document for what I can just ascertain as political purposes?
Well, there should be, and one of the things that we get at in Justice on Trial is how the behavior of Democrats and their staffers were so they were viewed as so over the top by Republican senators that they actually almost came to blows about it in the ante room, which is the room off of the Senate Judiciary Hearing room. They were very frustrated with the game playing and the manipulation of the process. So it definitely harmed the committee's, comity and whatnot. But there should have actually been an investigation into how this was handled and why it was handled this way. After the Clarence Thomas debacle, there was an investigation. That's actually why the procedure was put in place.
Right.
So it should have happened again. Lindsey Graham gave this great speech where he talked about how awful it was. Well, he's now the chair of the committee. He has a lot of power here, and he should use it.
I want to get into Lindsey in just a couple of moments here, but real quickly in our last few seconds before our first break here, how does that work? Who oversees that? Is that something that Lindsey sets up in a separate committee, or can that be done in a judicial committee?
Well, he heads the Judiciary Committee now. It was Charles Grassley during the confirmation. So I imagine the Judiciary Committee could look into it, but really it's a violation of the rules. So we did see Cory Booker violating confidentiality and got investigated by the Ethics Committee. They didn't choose to take any action, which is unfortunate. Oh, yes. So there's other committees that could look into this as well, I think.
Okay. We've got Carrie Severino and Mollie Hemingway. We're going to be right back after the break. This is fascinating, folks. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back, America's Voice News. Dave Sussman here, and I'm delighted to be joined by Carrie Severino and Mollie Hemingway. And real quickly, folks, where can they find you and the book? I know it's everywhere right now. Amazon bestseller, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah, the book is everywhere, and we're very excited with how well it's doing. It's been topping Amazon, and it's also available in bookstores. And my work is found at the Federalist, which is at thefederalist.com. And I'm also a Fox News contributor, where I'm regularly on Special Report with Bret Baier and Media Buzz, the Sunday morning media show.
Yeah, we're both obviously on Twitter, MZ Hemingway, JCN Severino. My organization is at judicialnetwork.com to find out the work that we're doing to advance judicial nominations. But also, obviously, this is really, trying to understand what happened last time, I think, is a key to learning how to do that in the future. So it's something I'm doing for my day job as well.
That's fantastic. And by the way, shout out to Mollie. This will also be heard on Ricochet. So thanks.
Yay.
Yeah. Everybody on there says hi. So you detail Cavanaugh's preparations in the book, and you go into his remarks, and obviously the 45-minute speech that he had, that impassioned speech, and got some video clips of this that are going to be played throughout. Which let me ask you this: as he was preparing that speech, what was the impact of Michael Avenatti coming out with the Sweatnik, the gang rape allegations that were completely left field? Because he seemed like somebody that was not at that moment really angry. You saw him earlier in that week on a Fox News interview. Did that turn him, or was it something else?
In part, yes. You have very few people who would have been as well prepared for the confirmation process as Brett Kavanaugh. He actually taught a course at Harvard on Supreme Court nominations, and so he understood what was probably going to happen. The White House counsel was very well versed in this. They'd already just gone through something with the Gorsuch nomination. They understood, and they knew what was to be expected. So it wasn't like a complete surprise. They'd already dealt with the circus of the first hearings, but the whole time Kavanaugh was getting kind of conflicting information or advice from different people. He'd worked in the Bush White House. He had a lot of good friends there. That was kind of more what his temperament is. They were giving him what they would call the Bushies were giving him one set of advice about the need to be kind of how he was in that Martha McCallum interview that was broadcast on Fox News before his testimony. And then other people like Don McGahn at the White House counsel kept telling him, "You're a Trump nominee. You need to fight." By the time he's being accused of serial gang rape and running gang rape cartels and going on cross-country crime sprees, he doesn't need to be told anything. He's just fighting for his reputation. He is the father of 2 young girls. He had a stellar reputation that he had worked very hard to develop over the course of decades. And at that point, it's not about the seat on the Supreme Court. It's just really about his name. And so it came out as it came out.
When you watch him and you watch that 45-minute speech, and there's some elements of that speech that just tear you up. I mean, you can't be a human being and not feel empathy for this man. Were there anybody on the left side of that dais that were, reconsidering? Did they back off a little bit? I mean, what was the discussion at that time?
Well, it was a really a concern, especially in light of, for example, the extreme Avenatti allegations. What was really shocking to many people is seeing people like Senator Feinstein embracing that and suggesting that was a plausible nomination. And I think unwittingly that played into, again, overstepping, much like when she had held on to her to that letter for so long. That overstepping hurt their credibility because those allegations were so extreme. A lot of people that we talked to on the team, it was fun to learn, they viewed Avenatti as the turning point of, oh, now it's become so ridiculous that everyone can see this is not for real. So so the fact that they embraced that is really surprising.
But having said that, I do remember our interviewing was so extensive that we were interviewing people who were just in the hearing room because they had a unique perspective as well. And what they said was that from their perspective, sitting there behind now Justice Kavanaugh, they could see that, in fact, the Democratic senators were uncomfortable. Some of them did seem moved. Alyssa Milano was in the hearing room. She actually was crying. So it was a very emotional thing for everybody. And I think people were surprised. And actually, frankly, on both sides, people were moved by Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, and also the just the energy in the room and the emotion surrounding the entire day's events was hard on everybody across the political spectrum.
Yeah, and it's a very small room. Having been there now, it's intimate. It's so everyone's right next to each other on both sides. So yeah, a very emotional experience.
Expected that it would devolve into this. Explaining this to our daughters has been about the worst experience of our lives. Little Liza, all of 10 years old, said to Ashley, we should pray for the woman. It's a lot of wisdom from a 10-year-old. We mean no ill will.
When you take a look at something like that, and the commentators and the pundits right after Blasey Ford made her presentation, it was over for Kavanaugh. It was done. I mean, there was no coming back. How surprised from your perspective, were you and the senators, do you think, how impassioned Kavanaugh was?
Yeah, I think that was very key. We tell the story of how he, as he's speaking to Don McGahn, as he's getting ready to go out, getting ready to do this. One of the great moments I thought was when Ashley, his wife, tells him that story about Liza, where she's praying for Christine Blasey Ford, and he decided to include that. He took out a Sharpie right then and wrote that into his speech. And I think that turned out to be one of the moments, again, where there wasn't a dry eye in the House. So I think that was key. The one other fascinating thing we learned was that, in fact, after the first, a lot of people saw that there was a real challenge, an uphill battle, like having finished her testimony, that it was really on the line for him. We learned there was at least one Republican senator, and you might be surprised, someone who's regarded as quite conservative, but who was saying, you know what, it's time to cut the line here. Let's maybe we should go and talk to the president and ask him to trade Kavanaugh out for somewhere else. So there were even senators at the time who were suggesting it's over. But the other fascinating part is that Susan Collins had this proposed to her, and she said, who's the moderate senator here, right? It was a swing vote. Yeah. We didn't know her vote on him at the time. She said, you know what? This is important to hear both sides of the story. I'm not going to make a conclusion before we've heard both sides. That commitment to the rule of law was really striking and very courageous on her part, and I think was carried out in the way she addressed the hearing throughout.
Yeah, it's incredible when you see the image of Dianne Feinstein, and she's bullying Senator Murkowski in the hallway that went viral, right? And when you see Susan Collins come out and made that speech that she did in the well, she really played a pivotal role in this. She said, "I believe in due process." I mean, that's what it comes down to. It was about due process. But the pressure on her must have been like a tsunami, right? I mean, what was going on behind the scenes with her and the Democrats?
It was a lot of pressure, but I think that the people who were pressuring her didn't have a good understanding of what motivates her. I mean, obviously, she's motivated by rule of law. The moment they started bullying her, which, it's interesting to note, happened before Kavanaugh was even nominated. The first set of hangers, or, she was getting hangers sent to her office as a sort of veiled threat about her vote, was sent in June of last year. So before he was nominated, which was July 9th of 2018.
Wow.
And she's nicely the kind of person who does not respond to bullying. It just strengthens her resolve, and it steeled her for the days to come. There were things that were very bad that happened to her staff, rape threats and horrible, vile comments that caused her to lose some staff who just couldn't deal. It was just a horrific thing to ask some low-level staffer to put up with these horrible phone calls and threats. But she felt that it was even more important to not be bullied, and that her role as, in the Constitution, it talks about the advice and consent of the Senate being necessary for these nominations. She took it seriously. She takes it seriously whether a Democrat nominates the justice, or a Republican, and she has shown that over the course of her tenure.
How do you think it ends up for her? I know that she's up for re-election. She's a huge target for the left right now, isn't she?
Yeah, and they made that a factor during the nomination. In fact, there was a GoFundMe campaign that said, well, if you vote against Kavanaugh, we'll get our money back. But if you vote for him, it's raising money for whoever her eventual Democratic opponent is going to be. That's actually something that lawyers suggested may run afoul of federal bribery laws. It, again, hasn't actually been followed up on, unfortunately, because I think it's a serious problem when we have bribes like that going on. But again, she's someone who is so principled and so courageous that even knowing that she was going to be up in 2020 and that was going to be a big part of her campaign, she stood on principle. I hope, and I think the people of Maine will see that as a real asset in their senator, but we'll see. I think she's also in the process, though, gained a lot of fans of people who were impressed with that, who maybe don't agree with all of her policy, maybe are more conservative, but said we have just unending respect. I heard that over and over. People who said, I never really thought much of Susan Collins before, and now I can't say enough what a courageous woman she was. So I think she also earned herself a lot of credit with people. Yeah, with the way she comported herself.
A lot of kudos to her. We're going to be right back with Carrie Severino and Mollie Hemingway. We're talking about their great new book, their best-selling book, Justice on Trial: The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. Dave Sussman here. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
We would start the vote right now, but as a point of personal privilege, I would call on Senator Flake.
Oh, thank you. I have been speaking with a number of people on the other side. We've had conversations ongoing for a while with regard to making sure that we do due diligence here. And I think it would be proper to delay the floor vote for up to, but not more than 1 week. In order to let the FBI continue to do an investigation limited in time and scope.
And Dave Sussman back with you, and we are talking about the Kavanaugh hearings with Carrie and Mollie. Again, real quickly on your tweets, where can they find you on Twitter?
I'm at MZ Hemingway.
And I'm at JCN Severino.
Okay, I want to talk Jeff Flake real quickly here. Jeff Flake delayed the vote after he said that he would vote for Kavanaugh before he decided to delay the vote for Kavanaugh. It was kind of a mess because he wanted the FBI to do a supplemental investigation. What happened with Flake, and was there some kind of coercion from, what was it, Coons, Senator Coons? What was that all about?
This is a very interesting subplot that we get into in Justice on Trial. And it's not just a simple this or that kind of story. Jeff Flake is someone who really struggled in the last couple of years. He had not quite known how to deal with the changing political winds. His electorate explained to him or conveyed to him that he would not be reelected. He decides not to run again. But he is someone who had prided himself on being a conservative, so he generally was good on these votes. He was a source of frustration for his colleagues in the Senate because of his ability to be persuaded by the Democrats. And a great example was what happened with Jeff Coons. Jeff Coons, Chris Coons, we looked at what he was doing throughout the confirmation process, and he was actually making his remarks in such a way that they would be persuasive to Jeff Flake, in the same way that Republicans were trying to get moderate Democrats and secure the votes of moderate Republicans. Democrats targeted Jeff Flake as someone who they might get on their side. And to some extent, it worked, right? He does do this delay at the last minute. But a lot of people ended up thinking that that delay was very helpful. We go through the scene, by the way, where the delay is organized, and it's got Chris Coons and Jeff Flake in this tiny phone booth just outside the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room as they're negotiating and trying to figure this out. And they're all tangled up, limbs and whatnot. They're in this really hot room. Their entire staffs are all, and other senators are all crowded in there. And it was a very chaotic scene. But it ended up being this week delay made it quite conclusive. There was nothing to these allegations. It was like, he'd already gone through 6 background investigations, Kavanaugh, prior to that. And it made people feel much more comfortable when they got that final report from the FBI, and they saw that not only was there nothing to support these allegations, there was some evidence of witness tampering and other things that made them even more suspicious of that organized rollout of these allegations.
But the Democrats still weren't satisfied once that final investigation came back, were they?
No, I mean, I think at a certain point, if you're not willing to look at the facts and are just trying to get a result, they're not going to be satisfied until they felt like they had the votes. And we talk about this as a real theme to the process was they knew from the beginning they might not be able to stop the nomination, but they wanted to delay it as long as possible. Their real hope was to delay it past the November election, thinking that might help them in the polls. That obviously didn't happen, but I think they thought the farther we can drag this out, the more painful we can make this, the better. So, and look, we had people who a little under a year ago were saying we're about to put a rapist in the Supreme Court. This is outrageous. Yeah. And yet suddenly after he was confirmed, we don't see the continuing. They said we need more time to look into this. Well, what have you found? You've had 9 months now. What more have we seen? We haven't seen any further information. No more evidence that's come out. So I think it's not surprising to see that people who are really using this more for delay than really thinking there was a real there right. Have abandoned and moved on to other tactics.
Last couple of questions for you because I know you have a heart out here on Lindsey Graham. How surprised were you on how I guess angry he was? And that he voiced so many Americans' anger on that dais that day. I mean, he was, a thug life guy, right? He was a meme for months after that.
This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy. Are you a gang rapist?
No.
I cannot imagine what you and your family have gone through. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham, that you knew about it and you held it. You had no intention of protecting Dr. Ford. None. She's as much of a victim as you are. God, I hate to say it because these have been my friends. But let me tell you, when it comes to this, you're looking for a fair process. You came to the wrong town at the wrong time, my friend.
What was the reaction by the left when he was basically pointing their finger at them the way that he did?
Well, I think one thing that was interesting, in the same way that Republicans were were lacking confidence after Christine Blasey Ford's testimony heading into Cavanaugh's, Democrats who had the media working with them, they thought that this was over. And so once Kavanaugh comes out and testifies and does this, very difficult job of defending himself so effectively, alarmed at how much their plan had backfired. But they kept trucking and kept trying to delay. So.
Yeah, well, we got a little bit of a connection issue, right? So last question here for you real quickly. Even though Democrats lost this fight, and by the way, would any other president besides Donald Trump, would any other president stood by Kavanaugh? Real quick question on that.
That was one we asked a lot of people we talked to. And I think the vast majority said, we don't think so. Even people who loved, President Bush or other things, they said, this is maybe the president we needed right now for such a time as this. I mean, it was really a crucial moment where if the left
Even though the Democrats lost this fight, it was still very, very, very close. Were they emboldened by this? When RBG retires, are we going to, if she is still alive, by the way, are we going to see this again and again? Does it get worse, or was that a turning point for Supreme Court nominations?
I think it's up to the American people. If people are held accountable, and if it's conveyed that it is unacceptable to do this type of thing to a man merely because you disagree with someone's politics, that's the important thing. American people need to stand up and say no more. So that's why we wrote Justice on Trial. We want people to know the facts so they are better equipped to fight against such future scurrilous attempts at destroying people's lives.
How can people do that? I mean, the Democrats won the House less than a month later in 2018.
There are elections all the time, and people should think about how their elected representatives and senators comported themselves on this and other issues. There are also ways of, letting the media know that their behavior was wrong, conveying to the people who are there about the need to hold people accountable for false accusations. If you act like it's acceptable, people will think it's acceptable. And I think people need to remember how outraged they were and continue to be outraged until the message is properly sent.
Mollie Hemingway, Carrie Severino, co-authors of the book Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. Thank you so much, ladies. I wish you nothing but success. I'm delighted to see this thing has rocketed all the way to the top bestseller right now. And may you have continued success.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Well, that was fantastic. And there's just so much information. And, you know, again, one of the most pivotal moments in American history. We're going to be looking back at this period for years. Constitutional lawyers and historians are going to be looking back at the Kavanaugh hearings. And we were there. We were watching it live. We were throwing things at the TV. We were furious. And we were cheering and crying and frustrated. And we all went to social media. And that's all part of what we do as citizens that are involved and are watching history taking place. But, you know, this thing didn't happen in a vacuum. You read this book and you realize that there's at least 5 different reasons for Kavanaugh to actually successfully win the nomination and obviously be seated as a justice, as associate justice. First of all, you've got a president who not only ran on appointing conservative judges, but actually is doing it. How many conservatives really believed that he was going to do what he said he was going to do? Certain never-Trumpers, you know, this was the important thing for them, and they still haven't come around. That's another issue altogether. But winning an election isn't just the only thing that you need to do. You also have to have the right key members of a president's staff. And Don McGahn, he is probably one of the unsung heroes in all of this. He pushed this thing through. And when it looked like Kavanaugh was not going to make it, especially after the Michael Avenatti, the gang rape stuff, all that stuff came out, and it looked like it was just, oh, God, horrible. He doubled down and he made sure that Trump was still on board, which he was. And he kept Kavanaugh. You know, he wanted to go back and, as both Carrie and Mollie were talking about, to get Kavanaugh to show some anger, show that we are all angry as well. But also, it's important to understand how important it is for the Republicans to maintain the Senate. This would have never have happened if Chuck Schumer was heading up the Senate. If he was the Senate Majority Leader, you hope at best you can get a Merrick Garland in. Right? I mean, you know, as progressive as the House and the Senate Democrats are today, and the way that they're pushing over all the way towards socialism, thank goodness. But this is really important of every single election, including midterms, ladies and gentlemen. Don't just wait for the president to be on the top of the ticket to go out and vote. You got to vote for the Senate, because this was the difference right here. And also, you know, one of the most frustrating things for me as I watch this is that I know some Republicans would have voted for a Democrat nominee. They do, as Lindsey Graham was talking about. You know, he voted for the last 2 Democrat nominees that went through. So how many on the left would have voted or did vote? Only one, Joe Manchin. And that was, you know, come on. That was political gamesmanship on he was almost kicked out of the Senate in West Virginia. He barely won that state by a couple of points, and he knew that if he didn't vote for Kavanaugh, he was not going to win re-election. But nobody else did. Nobody else did. And in fact, we lost, what's her name? Murkowski, right? Murkowski from Alaska. And then it's important to understand the ground game. It really is a huge part of all of this. And we don't see this every day. But the organizations that were focused on ensuring that originalist judges were going to be nominated and appointed. And, you know, the infrastructure that made Gorsuch and Kavanaugh possible happened with the conservative groups, the Federalist Society and so on. They were pushing this, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. It takes decades. It takes decades to train and put the right judges up and make sure that the right senators and the right politicians are voted for. And this is one of the biggest challenges that the Democrats have. for the next 10, 20 years. And they know this. Why do you think they put up such a huge fight? That the farm team that the Republicans and the conservatives have been growing and seeding for the last couple, 3 decades is why the Democrats are so concerned over losing the Supreme Court for generations. Why conservatives basically own it. And with whatever happens in the next few years, assuming President Trump wins re-election, they are petrified, which is why I think that this isn't the last time that you're going to see a Kavanaugh hearing. Secondly, or fourthly, I should say, we're in a different time today. We have the news media. We have the outlets outside of the mainstream media, and we all know where their allegiances lie. But make sure that you're out there on social media, that you're writing blogs, that you're going on different conservative or right-of-center websites, or you're in the comment section of left-wing websites, and you're fighting the good fight. Every single person has a voice today. Every single person has the opportunity to be heard. And when you hear lies and blatant disinformation from the media, fight back with it. Don't just take it lying down. We know the lies that are coming out. We know how they just don't care about the truth. So with media, mainstream media, obviously 95% owned by the left and the extreme left, the right has to come together in the outlets that we have, which is online, whether it's talk radio, whether it's blogs and different websites, and write those articles and don't allow the media to control the narrative. And finally, I think one of the most important parts of all of this is that conservatives are awake. They keep using the term woke, right? The left are woke. No, like everything the left says, it's completely the opposite of the truth. All right. They're sleepwalking, right? They have no idea what's going on. They're just like lemmings following their leaders off a cliff. You know who's really woke? It's conservatism today. Conservative Americans today, conservatives all over the world. We see this in England and Canada and Australia and Brazil and all the other countries, Italy, France. People are raising up. They are sick and tired of being told by the elites and by the governments lies, and they know these lies. And so continue to fight using the aforementioned venues that we talked about. And, next time we have a situation, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg, goes away soon and we have a new fight on our hands, it's going to probably make Kavanaugh look like tiddlywinks. Anyway, very special thanks to Mollie Hemingway and Carrie Severino. Go check out the book, folks. This is a fascinating subject. This is living history. And again, the book is Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation, and the Future of the Supreme Court. Very special thanks to those ladies. And thank you for watching. And we'll be back again very, very soon. I'm Dave Sussman, Whiskey Politics. Cheers.